Hello, welcome to another edition of Aaron Bastani with me, Aaron Bastani, at Aaron Bastani on Twitter. You can comment on, follow, like, and share this content as ever under the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag IMO Bastani. Thanks for watching. In 1982, Chris Mullin published a political thriller talking about what would happen if a radical socialist leader of the Labour Party took power in Britain. 3 years later, that book was turned into a fantastic dynamite film for TV, for Channel 4. Go watch it, 1985, and the film is called A Very British Coup. In that novel and later TV adaptation, Harry Perkins, a former Sheffield steel worker, unexpectedly enters 10 Downing Street, and he does so on an incredibly radical platform, which includes nuclear disarmament, leaving NATO, getting American air and military bases out of the UK, and a raft of radical socialist economic policies. The climax of that film is Perkins falling victim to an incredible conspiracy, which includes a range of media proprietors, the CIA, MI5, the Civil Service, and to some extent the BBC. The most effective of Perkins' domestic enemies is one Sir Percy Brown, an aristocrat and head of MI5, whose ancestors unto the ages have secretly controlled Britain's politics and society from behind the scenes. Fast forward 30 years to last weekend, the Sunday Times interview with an unnamed serving general in the British Army who said, on the record, although unnamed, that Corbyn's ascent to Labour Party leader had met with wholesale dismay, his words, amongst senior elements of the British Army. That unnamed general went on by saying there would be mass resignations at all levels, and you would face the very real prospect of an event which would effectively be a mutiny. Well, that's very polite and kind language. What he means is a coup. He means the ousting of a democratically elected Prime Minister in Britain. Carries on by saying, feelings are running very high within the armed forces. You would see a major break in convention with senior generals directly and publicly challenging Corbyn over vital important decisions, such as Trident, pulling out of NATO, and any plans to emasculate and shrink the size of the armed forces. Emasculate and shrink, well, we know what metaphors are probably coming to mind here. The army just would not stand for it. The General Staff would not allow a Prime Minister to jeopardise the security of this country, and I think people would use whatever means possible, fair or foul, that's an incredibly significant thing to say, to prevent that. You can't put a maverick in charge of the country's security. Now I just want to repeat that last excerpt. Whatever means necessary, fair or foul. Now you can imagine a spectrum here of measures that the military, in consort with MI5, MI6, would probably embark upon. The kind of vanilla end of that would be what they did to Harold Wilson in the 1970s. MI5, probably several dozen people within MI5, would be issuing kind of monthly briefings, making stuff up about Corbyn's past, cabinet members' past. There'd be blackmail, all kinds of things going on. That's actually quite nice. Fair or foul, that's the fair side. The foul side is a coup. Getting rid of the guy by force, by any means necessary. Again, I quote, not Alex Jones from InfoWars, not Max Kaiser on Russia Today. This is a general who's serving right now, unnamed, on the record to a Sunday Times journalist. The truth is this, over the last 5 years, alongside cuts to local government spending, military spending has actually really taken a hit. And all these big military chiefs, these bigwigs, thought that was as bad as it gets. Now they're being confronted with a Labour leadership, an opposition party, which has openly talked about in the last 5 to 10 years, this is Corbyn and McDonnell in particular, openly talked about unilateral nuclear disarmament, leaving NATO, being able to work with people like Hamas and Hezbollah, having no problems historically with the armed struggle and the IRA. These bigwigs, these military top dogs, thought the last 5 years had been hell, but now they're looking to the 5 years that might come after 2020 if there was a Labour-led government. If the last 5 years were hell, those 5 years will be absolute catastrophe. Now this is such a huge story, right? I mean, it was only really covered by the Sunday Times because obviously they got the scoop, they got the interview with this guy, he probably approached them, and it was repeated in the Mail on Sunday. This is a huge story. Barely anybody talks about it, right? When you think about it, this is treasonous to start with because you're talking about an unelected member of the military speculating about the overthrow of a democratically elected government. The Queen's government, albeit. Now, I don't believe in a monarchy, I'm a Republican, but in Britain we have a constitutional monarchy, and in Parliament, that's the Queen's government. So this is sedition. What these generals are talking about is treason. That's a big deal, right? Now, the MOD, in response to all of this, said they wouldn't look into it. There would be no inquiry into this leak. They said there were simply too many generals to investigate. We saw after the Snowden revelations the scale, I mean, the hugely impressive scale, which I don't think anybody really knew, of the surveillance states with GCHQ and the NSA in the United States, just how much they did, just how much they were doing, just how big they thought their remit deserved to be. Now, their excuse was, their alibi was, well, look, we need to do this to safeguard democracy and to uphold the public interest. We have this huge architecture, this huge surveillance state to save you, to look after you, to protect you, the public, the ignorant, poor, blessed and meek public. What this story shows is that's completely untrue. That's a lie, because here is an individual within the army openly talking about treason, sedition, removing, overthrowing a democratically elected head of state with impunity. And this exact same infrastructure could find this guy in an hour, in 10 minutes. What's most important here, I think, is actually the fundamental rupture between the majority of public opinion, where most Brits are at, and where these unhinged, entitled military bigwigs are at, and what they think they're entitled to. If you look at military spending in Britain, it's still about $60 billion a year. That's despite, like I said, receiving huge amounts of cuts since 2010. Britain remains the 6th biggest spender on its military in the world. It spends 2% of GDP. That's 2% of the whole economic output. By comparison, Germany spends about 1%, ditto Japan, ditto Italy. And Japan's got far bigger problems in terms of its local neighborhood than we do, right? You've got China, you've got North Korea, and yet they spend only 1% of GDP. We spend 2%. The argument should surely be then, and I think this is something that Labour should wholeheartedly talk about, not just on the left, not just in the centre, but the whole of the party should be saying, after 2020, we want to halve military spending to 1% of GDP. Then that would be a saving of $30 billion a year. $30 billion. That would mean free education, you could scrap tuition fees, more housing, renationalising energy, lowering bills, renationalising the rail network, lowering the cost of public transport. It could mean so many things. That's $30 billion a year, right? That's not one-off or for 2 years or 3 years. Over 5 years, that amounts to over $150 billion. That's a hell of a lot of money. What scares them the most, more than a Labour-led government after 2020, is that the public could really cotton on to a very simple, elementary truth, which is this: we don't need a military anywhere near as big as what we've got in Britain. We're not an imperial power anymore. We're a small island in the North Atlantic, and many people on this small island will have far more money spent on health, education and housing. So let's go and do it. At the very least, Labour after 2020 should be actively saying they want to cut military spending from 2 to 1%, therefore saving $30 billion a year. Even if you did that, even if you think we should have an army, which I don't think we should, you'd still have a military force capable of doing the bare essentials expected of it. So what do you think? You know what I think. I think we need to be talking about actively cutting military spending from 2 to 1% of GDP after 2020. Get that $30 billion and put it into homes, schools, universities and the NHS. What's more, we need a people's GCHQ to find this loudmouth general, smoke him out and bring him to justice. Why don't you put those thoughts down on the hashtag? Hashtag IMO Bastani. Thanks for watching. Bye.